Hello, everybody. Thanks again so much for being here. This is the second day of our online learning labs as part of ANH Academy Week 2025. We're really excited for this session today. I really want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. My name is Alex. I'm the technical manager for this learning lab entitled Use of Food Ontologies for Interoperability across Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health. Our session today is chaired by Kanika Agarwal and Ritu Kuntum. We are very excited to have two experts with us for this learning lab. I want to thank you again for participating today. We're really excited for the active session. So without any further ado, thank you all again for being here, and I'll turn it over to Kanika to get the session started.
Hi, thanks, Alex, for having us here. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. We're really excited to be part of the ANH Academy 2025 and thank the organizers for having us present this learning lab. We would really like to thank Alex, Alina, Shailin for all their logistical support that we've been receiving so far. So as a brief introduction, I'm a doctorate in nutrition and I'm very passionate about how what we eat affects our well-being. And I'm particularly interested in non-communicable diseases and the intersection of nutrition with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And now I'll just ask Rintu to quickly introduce himself before we begin with the session.
Hello everyone, I hope I'm audible. So myself, Rintu Kuntum, and I'm a faculty fellow in the Department of Computer Science, and I work in the intersection of health and nutrition, and we'll be talking about today a little bit of how we use different databases and sources that can be used for biomedical research. Welcome everyone.
Well, thanks, Rintu. So today we're going to focus on food ontologies, and we're going to look at how interoperability, so how we can use different terminologies across agriculture, nutrition, and health. So the sessions are divided into three broader sections. First, we look at how nutrition, agriculture, and health are interrelated. It's not like a linear relationship. There are a complex web of factors that interrelate nutrition, agriculture, and health with each other, where arises a problem of different terminologies being used, building a case for the use of ontologies, which is like a controlled vocabulary across different fields. And lastly, we'll specifically focus on food ontology and looking at the utility of food ontology and how it can integrate agriculture with nutrition and health. And lastly, we'll have a hands-on session on using different, how to look up these terms and how we can utilize them for our research purposes. So when we look at a food product, we can look at it from a different lens altogether. So for instance, if we look at wheat, somebody could look at wheat from an agricultural point of view, somebody from a nutrition background could look at it, say, from a caloric point of view, while from a health, somebody could look at a disease point of view. So keeping this example constant throughout the session will help us understanding how these linkages work together and how ontologies play a major role across these three fields. So, we'll briefly look at the definition. So agriculture is basically all set of activities related to crop, livestock production, forestry, fisheries, and aquaculture for food and feed. While nutrition is defined as the science of ingestion, digestion, absorption, utilization, and excretion of food. And health is like encompasses nutrition in a way where it looks at a state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. So when we're looking at from a nutrition perspective, we usually look at it kind of an angle where what is on the plate, and we just focus on the food on the plate, and we don't look at it from the silos of, where was it grown? What does it contain? Or, how does it affect our body? And looking at this, we'll just look at how the UNICEF frameworks aligns nutrition and health and indicates how, by understanding determinants of nutrition, we can better understand the health outcomes, especially in maternal and child nutrition perspective. So if we look at this UNICEF framework for maternal and child nutrition, we see there are 3 different underlying determinants, with the immediate determinant being diet. So when we look at diet, agriculture is something that comes up, but it's not really an determinant which is clearly focused here, where agriculture would support, say, food production. It will provide accessibility and availability to food. And if the food that is available is diverse, then the diets of an individual are likely to be good, which would lead to, better maternal and child nutrition outcomes and better health outcomes. Likewise, if you look at the underlying determinants, where you could have access to food, but if your practices and your surrounding environment don't match, so in case, you're not feeding, you haven't started complementary feeding at 6 months of age, then the nutritional outcome for that infant is not going to be good. So the health is impacted, in spite of, having all that knowledge of food accessible to you. The other important factor is hygiene, so the surrounding environment. So if there is poor hygiene, then that is likely to, cause infection, and then, it becomes a vicious malnutrition infection cycle where the child keeps falling sick, they don't get enough food, and then they become malnourished. So in these cases, we see how nutrition and health are interconnected, and we don't see a direct link with agriculture. Following this slide, I would just like to walk you through how agriculture is related to nutrition, and in terms of 3 pathways. So one is food production, the other is agricultural income, and the other is women empowerment. So if somebody is from an agrarian background, if there is food production, so they're growing crops, that will encourage, that'll affect processing and storage. So they'll process it in a different way, they store it properly. And with that, there'll be distribution, so there'll be access to food, and they'll have a good diet, depending on what type of food products are available to them, affecting their child nutrition outcomes, inevitably, an adult outcome. So if the child is nourished, they're likely to become a, well-nourished adult who can work actively. Now, in this food production, if during the course of growing of crops, if they're not exposed to a diverse set of food products, which could be affected by their agricultural income, so they're not able to afford a lot of food products, it would affect their food expenditure, affecting their food access, affecting diets, that is nutrition, and then affecting their health outcomes. Lastly, if we look at women's empowerment, so if the women in the family are not empowered enough to take healthy, to make choices of what to buy, where all to, spend money on, and if they're not knowledgeable of the correct food practices, that could again affect, food access, food distribution, food equity, equity in the family, affect the health status of the child as well as the mother. So these pathways tell us how agriculture, nutrition, and inevitably health are related to each other. But when we're looking at a lot of literature, either we see a lot of studies on nutrition or health, or their agriculture or nutrition, but we don't see the 3 being in the same place. And one of the reasons why that is because of ontologies. So we use different terminologies, and that creates, differences and difficulties in data being synthesized together. When we when we're looking at research, we see that a lot of research has focused on food availability and security. So, if there's a lot of research on nutritional quality, food safety, environmental health, dietary patterns, and food security and malnutrition in either broad fields, maybe not all together, but in separate fields, we've seen how agriculture, food systems, and human health can affect each other. So in terms of agriculture, if there's good food production, there's diverse food production, and there's efficient distribution of food, We'll have food security in a population, we'll have a healthy food population, which will have good productivity and they'll be able to work properly and, affecting national productivity. However, if there is, food availability is a problem, or there's food is available, but there is a problem in terms of distribution. So there's inefficient distribution. It could be due to various, pilferage during distribution. It could be inefficient storage processing where the food goes to waste. That could lead to an, population which is malnourished because they're not food secure. Then looking at the nutritional content. So whatever is grown on, on land, or it's, you have aquaculture or, livestock production. So the nutrient content of food plays an important role. In terms of food systems, what do people eat? So are they tilting towards processed foods or are they consuming whole foods? So that affects their nutrition. And human health is affected by those decisions. And a lot of times consumer demands shift the direction of food production. So in case there's a huge demand for, say, staples like rice and wheat, then a lot of agricultural production goes or is emphasized on these staple crops, resulting in, diversity of production going down. When we look at food safety, we're looking at minimizing health risk. It could be, tilting towards organic foods. It could be reduced utilization of chemicals of pesticides or insecticides while we're growing crops. It is important to know that a lot of workers or these farmers face a lot of occupational hazards because of pesticide exposure, which ends up resulting, affecting their health. And with this, there are a lot of health challenges that they face. And with digitalization and with digital technologies coming in, there is a lot of scope for smart farming in this area where you can use drones, you can use sensors, and you can use satellite imaging to see, the quality of crops. And there are also a lot of, startups which are working in this field where they're looking at smart farming in terms of pesticides. So they build technologies where their equipment would sense the crop, and they would spray the pesticide, the required quantity of pesticide only on that crop so that there is less drain off from the soil when, during the farming process. Utilization of these pesticides and also overall climate change affects our human health. So in case there's drought, then it affects, food accessibility, food availability, and diverts a lot of resources from other areas, which are then focused on, sending food to the needy. We also have dietary patterns which link consumer demand to food production. So if there's a demand for a particular food item, chances are that variety of crop is grown more. So for instance, if you're having, there's a lot of demand for French fries, and a potato variety would be grown more, which is more suitable to produce those French fries compared to other varieties. So which affects diversity, which affects the soil, the content of the nutrient content in the soil. And it also affects the health outcomes based on dietary consumption. And lastly, agriculture or environment, in terms of drought, famine, and floods, they all affect food insecurity. They all result in, malnutrition, leading to infections and poor productivity. So these are how, these web of linkages interweave between agriculture, nutrition or food systems, and human health. And it's very difficult to kind of separate these three when we're looking at a very holistic picture in terms of, healthy food systems. Now, when you see the slide, what do you think of? I mean, there are 4 pictures on this slide. Maybe from your own, background or area of interest, somebody could say, oh, it's a wheat crop. Somebody could say it's potato. From a nutritionist point of view, you could say, both of these are processed and you get burgers. Or from a physician point of view, you could just say, consumption or high consumption of fried fatty foods could lead to obesity. But these linkages are not so direct, and it's not always it's not just potato. There are different varieties of potato. that are there, the different wheat varieties that are grown. There are specific varieties that are grown for pasta, right? So looking at this, if we have 3 people or 3 experts sitting in different fields, and agricultural would say, this is wheat, and they look at the variety of wheat, they look at the yield of wheat, they look at the pest resistance of that wheat. They might be interested in whether it is a biofortified crop. While a nutritionist might think of wheat in terms of, is it a whole wheat flour? Is it a refined wheat flour? What is the macronutrient like? What are the micronutrients? Are there any fibers in it? Is the bran there? Is the husk been removed? How is it being removed? How is it being polished or processed? And when it comes to a physician, from a disease perspective, they might link it with diabetes, or they might link it with glycemic index. So having a high a consumption of refined wheat flour may just shoot up your glycemic index. They might look at it from a gluten sensitivity angle, whether if somebody is gluten sensitive, then they may want to avoid wheat. So all of these perspectives are there, and we need to kind of merge them together. And that's how ontologies help us, because each domain speaks a different language. And these languages are not always understood by somebody in the other field, right? And also, when we're looking at terms of, so for instance, if I'm looking at wheat as a nutritionist, I'm just looking at whole wheat flour, but from where it is grown, what is the variety, could affect the nutrient content of that particular food, which could affect their disease condition. So this is where we're trying to build a case of how interoperability, using similar terminologies for food products across the board, may help us in identifying and in collating data, which might be more useful for policies or for food labeling later on. So now I'll hand it over to Dr. Rintu to walk you through what are food ontologies. He is going to tell us about ontologies and what are the open source tools and databases that we can use for ontologies.
Okay, hi everyone. So myself Rintu again. So I'll be talking about the introduction to ontologies and also open source tools and databases that is widely used in this area. And the focus of the talk is typically applied what do you call as aspects of the ontology that we will be describing. And I will just quickly go with first what is ontology, and maybe I will talk about a little bit about the database and the tools that is used today really come together when it comes to the ontology. And because of the interoperability aspects that the ontologies covers, that I will be focusing more in this particular session. So when we talk about ontology, it is a way to show properties of a subject here. That can be, for example, a nutrition, or that can be a health perspective. And there are many related things that happens in a given problem statement. And we define typically as those in terms of set of term or terminologies that have some kind of a relational expression, and that represents the entities in the subject area. And as I mentioned here, it is typically what we are talking about. It is to do with the applied version of it. And you can have a different perspective of ontologies. That is, one can be more semantic in nature, and the other can be more of like a pragmatic point of view. And when we talk about the semantic nature of this, what we actually talk about is the content and how we can represent the content in a form of some way where we can understand the content appropriately, and also can be generalized to wider audience or for a knowledge generation purpose. For example, in a content you can have some kind of a terms or some kind of relationship that is there, and we define them with what are those things that present in that particular content and the relationship that come across. We will talk about that more in greater detail in the coming slides. And that has a lot of to do with the granularity of the what you call as the content itself, that how much we know, and that requires domain experts. And as we will go forward, we will again re-emphasize that how ontologies are a multidisciplinary activity. At the same time, there is a requirement of a very domain specificity of the content generation to a knowledge creation. In that, there are three building blocks that exist. One is the formalizations of how to go about formalizing it, then the expression of that, and also the structure that is related to that one. And that is typically to capture the semantic component of the ontology. Then you have another component which is more pragmatic in nature, where you have a domain, and which is to do with a very specific domain has a specific knowledge, and that knowledge have a specific purpose. And there is a lot of functional component with that domain itself. And in that framework, when we actually talk about the ontology, we talk about, over the context that is, which is there in the domain, we reason on the top of that. And there is a use of, like, for example, the governance of it and the intention of why we want to actually create an ontology and how that can benefit at the wider goal. And there is a design method aspects of it, which is to do with the rigorousness of it, validity of it, or the strictness of that component. Today, we will not focus on the pragmatic aspects in our session right now, but more we will focus on the semantic nature of it and how that really help us to understand systems better. So we can just think about this very simple information content where the Bob is a person, and then the person has an interest with some kind of information. That here it is the Mona Lisa, for example. And if you just think about this two information, that has a lot of information content itself. For example, Bob might be having additional information of having a friend, for example, Alice. And we can actually have the the relationship as is a friend of Bob. And likewise, Bob is also a person. So that also can be, we can actually keep the information into form of a Bob that is the relationship, is a person, which is the another information for Bob. Then you can have the other information, for example, date of birth can be also put into that relational mapping, which is Bob is born on that specific date. And likewise, since we have this interest, we can put as a is interested in the Mona Lisa. And if you go about that whole interest of that subject or the term, for example, Mona Lisa also contains its own information content. For example, it was created by Leonardo. And then you can have that in a what is this about. For example, you can have some kind of a video where you have some resources kept for this particular information itself. And this is typically nothing but how we represent. And this is the building block of the data set, which we will talk about, how those data formats are become very, very important while creating a ontology of information, which can be represented into more of like a graphical format. Then we can go more deeper into it. For example, in the image itself, we can go about putting more information that the background includes what. It's a sequence tree that can also become a part of the information content. Then as we go inside, so there are things are there. For example, from where we got this Bob related information, that is also we got the resource from. For example, this is the resource place where it is mentioned about the Bob. And there also we have a lot of information about in this web page itself. You have a license agreement, has a license of what is the license, then is published by the publisher itself. And this also can be also represented into a kind of a information, which is more part coming to the ontological aspects of it. Then we can have other thing. For example, this particular data is coming from a wiki data where we have a lot of information about Mona Lisa itself. And these two information contents are totally different from a different web pages. But when we interlink them, that actually brings the interoperability across different sources, which is in your example, there is an organization, there is a publisher, and there is a wiki data that available. And because of the inherently how we represented the data, now we can actually join them using some kind of a semantic layer or a more of a like a terminologies that which you are finding at the back end. So we'll discuss more on the how that gets stitched in the downstream part. And not only that one, using those information, we can get, for example, this particular entity actually coming from this, we can actually tag them. Then we can have the additional terms. For example, there is a creator information that who created this, the title of that particular term, that is the Mona Lisa. Then we can have the from this particular video source, we can actually put into the where exactly those what we call as that video information can be captured. Likewise, we can have the date information also into a specific format, which follows the
formatting of a date itself, which makes more interoperable in the transaction. Then you can have a person specific what we call as object, which is fall into this terminology. And likewise, the how it is known and also the topic of interest, this all can come from a different vocabulary itself. And the example set also can be put into a publisher or the rights information, which is the semantic or the relationship of that particular information content itself. So now just briefly as we discuss about the ontology. So in an information science perspective, ontology encompasses a representation, very, very important, with a formal naming and a definition of the categories, and along with that the properties and the relationship between the concept, data, or the entities that pertain to one or many or all domain of disclosure. And as we discussed in the earlier, there is a Bob is a one domain from it is coming, and the other one, Mona Lisa, is coming from the other domain. But because of those categories or the properties, we are able to relate them together and convert into a more of like a knowledge information. From an informatics point of view, which is like more of a like a computer and human kind of a interpretability part of it. So it is nothing but a set of computer and human interpretable terms that we can actually understand. Not only we as a human, but also computer understand it. And those terms and relationship can be represented into a something which we call as the entities and their relationship in a specific domain of the world, which we will discuss more further in how in food ontology or food related domain, how those are related and how that has a similar kind of annotations for agriculture and also for a human health. And if you are just think about more for like an information science perspective, you can have a different environment which can be grouped. For example, you have an information that can be grouped into some properties of like a data, then metadata, then the rules. You can have environmental systems which can be more physical environment and their attributes that are there, which for example, you have a computer, you actually define what environment the computer is there, what are the attributes are there, what is the properties of that particular room itself. Then you can have components, then you can have protocols to how to go about communicating across the systems. Then you can have a more to do with the organizational point of view. What is the mission, the requirement, the objectives, goals, scenarios, and different perspective for which the operation is very much there. And this is just to show you is a relationship that any domain, and for example, here is the information science domain, how the things are interlinked and how there is a kind of a different components that comes together with some kind of a relationship that connect one component with the other component. And if we just now describe about how the evolution of this ontologies has been there, it is primarily defined by how to go about representing the terminologies into more of a holistic format, which actually become very easy to understand both the computer aspects and also the human aspects. So in the left hand side, what we can see here, it is the evolution of how the terminologies or in fact the informations were put together. So there are terms that initially used to use in the, for example, the old days of when there was the internet was there, when we started, for example, in the Yahoo. So they used to use ad hoc hierarchical informations. Then eventually those came into something like a XML data schemas. And right now what we have is a more of like a technology based or a more formal technology or vocabulary based, for example, UML, ER, or database schemas, or in fact metadata, for example, XML schemas and the data models. And now we are in the stage where we are able to make those basic fundamental terminologies into more of a web ontology language base, where we can do a transaction across different systems. And when we talk about the ontologies, which currently we have, for example, OWL2 ontology, that can be allow us to convert or do a mapping between two kind of information. One is the ontology structure, which is there in the left hand side, and the RDF graph. The example that we discussed earlier about Bob and Mona Lisa, that typically is the representation that today we use as a RDF graph. And this can be made very much easy with the old OWL2 ontology mapping, where we can do the both structure and also the RDF graph mapping of it. And this has many options that you can have. For example, you can have to do with the semantic documents, the master documents that exist, where we can use this one to import and export a syntax document, or it can be a RDF/XML document itself. And you can have a OWL specific, or the new format that is there is the turtle document also we can use. And all of these can be made interoperable because of the interlink of OWL to ontologies, which can actually transaction across different data types. So when we talk about building ontologies from scratch nowadays, we don't try to actually build from scratch for any disciplines right now, because we have a maturity of many ontologies that exist, and also there are many tools, open source tools, for example, OntoFox, OntoDoc, OntoRed, for example, OntoB, OntoBeep, OntoKiwi, Intopedia. All of these open source tools can be used to really start building. If you get new terms, so you use search for reusing the existing ontologies, and using those existing ontologies, building your own triplets, or in fact the semantic layer, which is very much fundamentally that exists. For example, extracting the terms, and for given terms, finding the right terminologies that already exist in the databases. So just giving a one of those efforts, which is we call as a OBO Foundry, which is nothing but an open biomedical and biological ontology foundry, which is the landing place for getting to know about all the ontologies that exist. And this is typically driven by community development, and all of these terminologies are interoperable in nature across biological systems. And a lot of this, for example, the food ontology or the agri ontology, they also come into this play, because the health becomes a very critical component across different disciplines. And there are additional ontologies are also exist, which is more specific to, for example, environmental sciences that also are there, or maybe you have this geological ontologies that is also a part of extension part of this ontology itself, OBO Foundry itself. And there are a lot of materials already exist where you can go deeper into understanding whatever we have discussed today here. But nonetheless, you can go more deeper with the very specific to your domain. You can search for them. So what are the things that typically it contains? It contains three fundamental blocks, which is you have a relational ontologies, and then you can have a basic formal ontologies. And also there are some ontologies which is very specific to this particular OBO Foundry, which is the core ontology for biology and biomedicine. Apart from this, you have ontologies which can be of your interest. For example, for me, health is a primary aspects of it. So we have health related ontologies which is present there. Then you can have an anatomy and a developmental perspective. You can have phenotype specific, the investigation specific, environmental specific, organisms, chemistry and biochemistry, biological system, information or information technology, simulation, agriculture, microbiology, diet, metabolics, and nutrition. And all of this are well organized in this OBO Foundry, from which you can actually get into if your interest lies. And these are the some of the the abbreviations, the resources that is there. For example, for us, the most important part is like a food ontology, which we'll be describing, which is called as the food on. And there are other databases or ontologies are also there, which is related to food. For example, food-based dietary guidelines. You have something to do with FAIR principle, which is to do about like how to go about making your data reusable, or in fact make it interoperable, so that it can be used for other purposes also. And there are some ontologies very specific to is there. For example, disease ontologies, if you are looking into it, for example, Mondo disease ontology is one of them. If you are interested in human related phenotype ontologies, then we have human phenotype ontology, which is called as HP. Then you can have additional ontologies also, which is very specific to the nutritional studies. For example, that is the ONS itself. And on the FAIR part of the principle, is typically what it actually talks about is nothing but FAIR. F stands for the findability of the data, that you make sure that whenever you are creating new data set for ontology purpose or anything, that should be a findable into the component, that from where you have the source, where it is available digitally, whatever the work you have done, all of this. And that can be also become an accessibility part of it, where you make sure that your data is also accessible to other people. Then you have the interoperability, which we will already discuss about. For example, you can have some kind of a data representation in your domain through ontologies, you can make them interoperable. That can be, used by some other disciplines, which might be very crucial when they would like to ask a secondary use of the data set itself. And that really help us in, doing reusability of the data, whatever we create. So just to give you one snapshot about, like, for example, there are two different ontologies and how those two ontologies really crosstalk. For example, in the food ontology, you can find about apple, for example, and the apple can be as a biomarker of the apple can be found in the FOBI ontology. And these two linkages, for example, is a very good example to showcase that because the biomarker ontology group actually reused the ontology which was already made by effort in very early in 2015 or in on food ontology, that led to the building ontologies for the biomarker itself. And we'll talk about more in greater detail about food ontology and others in our session. But in general, if you actually talk about or understand about the whole ecosystem right now and the ontological aspects, our food ontology become, if you think about the central component that has a offshoot to all other ontologies that exist. For example, for animal health, you can have a different ontology groups which are there more multi-institutional projects. Then you can have a agriculture, which is CGIAR digital innovation, which you have a ergonomy ontologies, which contains already existing or made a lot of defined classes and the terminologies that actually there. Then more importantly, on the health side of perspective, you have ontologies for nutritional epidemiology. Then you can connect directly with the human disease ontologies, or you can also have a food interactions with the drug evidence ontology. And all of this are interoperable, all because that, the terminologies which was developed in food ontology was repurposed for other domains, but keeping in the mind that all of these are, integrated. So I will close the, my session here. I think Kanika can take it forward from here on the food ontology.
Yeah. So we've looked at ontologies, and now we're going to look at specifically food ontologies, which are focused on foods. And when we look at, this is known as food-on, and it is a consortium-driven ontology for food-related terminology. Now, the key word here is consortium. It's not just a single offshoot project of a lab and they decided to just do it. It's a collective group and a collaborative effort of a lot of experts across the world who work on this, and which results in making this food ontology a very robust development and which has global applicability. So because everyone across the world is collaborating to this, and this is open source, so in line with the FAIR principles. It consists of everything related to food. So food products, it could be food production. It is related to agriculture, environment, food safety, food quality, nutrition, and diet. So in other words, it's basically a controlled vocabulary. So where something like in the English dictionary, we have a vocabulary, food ontology is also a vocabulary which can be used, which uses parts of animals, plants, fungi. So for instance, if you're talking about, say, mustard seed, when we look up, it'll be it could be mustard seed from a specific variety of mustard. It could be mustard seed which is powdered. It could be mustard seed which is ground. So different segments of one simple thing which will come under the plant variety. It could it also looks at not just plants, it also looks at animals. It looks at the various processes that go into making these products. So if you're looking at milk, it could look at, in terms of milk, it'll look at pasteurized milk. Is it boiled milk? Is it raw milk? Did it come from goat? Did it come from cow, buffalo? So all of these nitty-gritties related to food products are all included in food ontology. And lastly, it's a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy of food items and their properties. So it's a highly organized and structured ontology or a vocabulary where everything has a place for each other. So like we see in this picture, there are diverse food groups and each belongs to a different category. Similarly, in ontologies, each food product, each different type of food product, different processing of food products has a different category or a subclass that it belongs to. So when did it start and why was there a need for food ontology? There was already a biomedical ontology. It started back in 2015, almost 10 years back, where there was a need to do it specifically because of foodborne disease outbreaks. Now, every lab had a different food item to report. It was difficult to collate all that information. And this lack of terminology actually led to building of food ontology and Obo Foundry, which is, which is like the main body, supported the development of food ontology, and thereon it has imported and exported different items to other ontologies, and it's integrated with them. So what does food ontology include? It includes raw food. So it could be apple, pear, spinach, anything. It includes prepared food items. So it could include apple pie. It could include ice creams. It includes food sources, their cooking and processing methods, and it's obviously linked to other vocabularies or ontologies. So here we're just looking at, like Dr. Rintu had showed, how it's related to different ontologies. Again, we're looking at how food ontology imports different terms from these ontologies, and it also gives its own terms to these ontologies, resulting in interoperability. So food ontology was built on a language called Langwan, which is actually used for food composition database by the US FDA. So a lot of terms are being used from Langwan. In addition, they're supported by ENVO, which is an ontology based on environmental terms, by CHEBI, which has molecular entities in biological processes. So for instance, if you're looking at selenium deficiency, so you look at selenium under this CHEBI. You can look at environment to look at the selenium content of the soil. And you could look at food on to look at, products that may be linked with selenium. And you can look at nutritional studies, if done any, on selenium. So they'll all use the same phrases for a particular food item, so that you have the same food and you can track the food across the chain. So when we look at the structure of food ontology, it maintains compatibility with basic formal ontology, which starts with entity. Except that now, from 2023, they've revised it, and now it starts with thing. So whatever we have, instead of material entity, it'll start with the thing. So it could be an apple pie, it could be an ice cream, etc. Followed by food material. What is the plant and animal anatomy? So if it's from an animal, then what is the anatomy? It'll have references. It'll have the constituent dietary or food processing that took place, or any chemicals that were found there. So it also, is this visible, or because I can see the panel in front of me? Right. So if you look at this, the food material, it's visible. Okay. So in case of food material, it contains the main food product, and it has a poly hierarchy of 9,600 food products. So what do we mean by poly hierarchy? It means that a single food product can belong to different parents. For instance, cheese can come under fermented products. So it can come under food product by process where there is fermentation. It could also come under food product. It could also come under animal foods or dairy foods, right? So it could belong to different categories. And when we look at the OLS lookup, we'll see how we can see it under different categories, and it is still the same. So the name is still the same, the definition is still the same, but it's there present across the different hierarchies that are given, or the subclasses that are given in under food on. So now, when we look at this relation, so it's very difficult to conceptualize this of how do we put it. So if we just look at a simple example of an apple. Now, when we talk of an apple, a farmer could just talk about an apple from an orchard, right? Or nutritionist might just ask somebody, did you have an apple juice, or did you have it in a whole form? Or did you slice it or eat it? Did you peel it or eat it? While a physician might be more interested in, what is the glycemic index of that. Now, when we're looking at apple, we see these web of connections showing us that these ontologies are like a map where each point is connected with each other, and it's not just lying, in isolation. If we look at apple whole raw, it has a unique identifier in foodon. So this is the unique identification code when we look at an apple. Now, this is a part of pome fruits. So, you build an arrow and you say this is the part of this, which is derived from this pome fruit plant, which again has a unique identification code, which comes from the tree. In taxonomy, scientific name. So you can circle back apple to a specific variety of apple that was grown. So if it's a different variety, the taxonomy would be different. Now, if we're looking at apple in terms of caramel coated apple, now again, it'll be raw. Was it from the same variety? It could be. What is this caramel a part of? This is caramel. It's a specific unique identifier, which is an output of which process. So it is a food coating or a covering process. Again, this process has a specific identification code. Or if you look at an apple coming from sliced apples. So again, sliced canned apples. So if you look at this, you have slicing as a different unit. Was it a slice of a whole apple or a part of apple? Again, it was part of an apple food product, which was derived from an apple whole, which came from this plant, basically. You can also look at the processing. So was this fruit canned? What was the output and what was it surrounded by? Was it surrounded by a can, bottle, or jar, right? Similarly, if we want to look at a different packaged product, so we're looking at a pie now. So it's not just apple, it's been processed and it's looking at apple. But if we just look at an apple pie, it'll have different segments. Right now, we're just focusing on apple. Otherwise, if you're looking at an apple pie, it'll have different segments of, say, the wheat crust, of butter, or whatever goes into making an apple pie. They'll all be, all these arrows will be coming out of it. But here the focus is apple. So we'll just look at this apple pie. It has an apple filling, which was then inevitably, produced making this apple. It is a baked pie. It is a pie food product. It's a bakery product. It is an output of, food filling process. It has an input, or pie crust is an input of this. So all of these things have unique identification codes. And if you're looking at, say, another pie, it'll have a different set of connections with it. The bottom line here is that here we can look at the food product across the chain. The identification code remains the same, and it leads you to the different classes and the different processes that the food product had gone through, right? So these are basically the relationships in ontologies that help us in, understanding and in creating interoperability. And the best part is that these are all open source and they're freely accessible to anyone who wants to use it for their research purposes. And where all can this be used, really? So it's used in the fields of agriculture, nutrition, and health. Government and regulatory bodies can use it. So in case, you want to look at a foodborne illness, you want to recall certain food items, you can use food ontologies to track the actual food or the variety of food that was used. In case you're looking at something like personalized nutrition or food traceability, you can track specific food items to specific, ontologies and make it more personalized. Food labeling could be, it could help in food labeling when you want to have specific, varieties, or you want to look at the nutritional component of food products specific to a specific variety of food that is grown. So there are a lot of advantages of food ontologies or ontologies in general. First, they're open source and collaborative. A lot of people can get together. They are working groups. You can work together and collaborate. They're all machine readable. So this is all data that is there. And it's easier and faster to link different ontologies. It's not like you're working on paper and working in silos. These are continuously updated. So it's not that something was done 10 years back and they haven't revised it. They keep updating these ontologies, and a lot of these ontologies are based on existing nutrition, food composition databases. And there is a lot of scope for adding different food composition databases. That's how they're being continuously updated. So if there's an indigenous food product in your country which hasn't been, included in these ontologies, there is a way that you can, you can work on this and get that added and build an ontology for that, which will have a unique identification code, and it'll be consistent across the ontologies. So I'll stop here now before the hands-on session and we would like to take your questions right now, and then we would like to proceed with the hands-on session.
But I see Kanaka and Ritu, I see two in the chat. One from Stasia that says, does everything have to be in English, or is any language okay?
Okay, so we have like a very specific group of ontologies, which is totally depends on the interoperability aspects of it. And one of the aspects that of interoperability is the language. And yes, there are existing ontologies have a support or beyond the English language itself. And there is as Kanika actually mentioned, there are opportunities also there where if there is some languages are not there. For example, in our case, in India, we have a lot of regional languages that exist, and we are actually contributing towards those aspects also. That those terminologies does not exist, and that's where, because of the open community framework, we can actually contribute. And I think there is a Jan actually asked exactly the next question as well: who is responsible for updating? So the updation happens like we have to submit our request to the ontology builder. For example, the food ontology is actually well connected with all different ontology group. For example, if you are having a English to other language, for example, there is a specific ontology group is there where you can directly do a email, or in fact join their working group and participate in the whole process. And the accuracies are definitely done in a more of like a iterative process. So you will be asked to join on board to the working groups and understand them better, how to go about making them itself. And there are a lot of technological also advancements are there where you can actually come up with, for example, there is something called as a link ML object, which typically a lot of people actually use to put your terminologies into that format. And the ontology people, for example, the food ontology people can actually provide or generate a term. And that's specifically what Kanika actually mentioning, that specific numerical ID can be generated with corresponding to the semantic relationship that's are there. Yeah. Any other questions? Happy to answer.
Right. So I would like you to click on, on your search engine, if you could just look at OLS ontology search. And this will direct you to a page which says, welcome to ENBL EBI ontology lookup service. Right. So when you look up this ontology, if we can look at a simple thing, say peanut, right? And you hit enter. This is what you get. So you get a lot of hits. These are SNOMED. So SNOMED is basically a clinical ontology term. So there is a lot of peanut allergy. Therefore, you see peanut agglutinin antigen, peanut containing substances or products. We're looking at food on right now. So we'll just look at this food on ontology, something like this that appears. This is the home page or the landing page. You can look at the different ontologies that are available on this lookup and see the wide spread of of these ontologies that are linked with each other and that are available on OLS lookup. So in case you want to look at something related to Alzheimer's, you have it here. You have things related to, if you look here, you have comparative data analysis, compositional dietary nutrition analysis. So there are a lot of things that you can look at and explore later. But right now, we just want to go to food on. So you can also select your ontology here if you want to, or you could just, keep it to food on and select it as a marker. So when I've clicked at peanut, I see this and I see the definition of peanut. So it says it is a seed of a peanut plant and it has this unique identifier, which I can copy and keep in case I'm doing some work and I want to, look at the various linkages. Or I could download the entire. So, and then I look at the tree. So this tree is actually the food on structure. You have the name of the contributor here. You have the name of the subclass here. So what is the class relation? So this is a seed according to plant ontology. It is a subclass of peanut food product, which is also a subclass of legume. And, again, in taxonomy, this is the name. So coming back to this is the basic formal ontology. So it's food material. If you look at food material by organism, it's a plant material. A plant food product, again, a subcategory is botanical food product. It comes under legumes. Then again, legumes, there are different sets of legumes. In this, we have peanuts. In peanuts, we have peanut food product. Again, it could be a nut food product. It could come under, vegetable food product. So again, if I click on peanut here, it will give me various categories of peanut. It could be peanut raw. It could be different varieties of peanut. It could be peanut dried. If I click on raw, again, it tells me, is it a red skin peanut? That means with it, is it with skin? Or is it without skin and you have runner peanuts, Spanish peanuts? So in case in your area where you reside, there's another type of peanut or a variety of peanut, you could work on the ontology and, have a unique identifier code for it so that it's consistent across different ontologies. Right? So if you want to look at, say, now we want to look at, say, apple pie. So if we look at apple pie, we can just, so we've seen the tree of how the map comes. Here we're looking at, say, apple pie, and we see what is the relationship like. So we look at the material entity. So it's a food material by organism. Again, it's a plant material, a plant food product. Plant feed or not food product. It comes under cereal because it's a baked food product. So it's a wheat-based bakery food product. Again, it's under bakery, there are different varieties. So it's a pie. And then under pies, we have a specific identifier for fruit pie. And that's where we have an apple pie. It could be an apple pie frozen. So if you type apple pie, baked and frozen, then you will get different hits. So if I click here on apple pie, I'll have a pie baked and then apple pie baked. Again, it's a plant seed-based bakery product. It's not that. But again, if we look at plant-based, then we have this apple pie baked again in this hierarchy. So this is how, when you're looking at this mapping is getting translated into the structure that was there earlier. So this is the structure that was mapped. This is how we derive the ontology, and this is how you kind of build it when you're building it in a platform like OLS and you want to integrate it with different ontologies. If you see here it says food on, but suppose if I say, if I go back and I look, if I type peanut here, it will direct me to a lot of other ontologies as well. So this is food on, but I can see how it's linked to different other ontologies. So peanut butter also appears in ecto FOBI on food biomarkers. So this is how, these ontologies are interlinked with each other and intertwined with each other. So any questions so far? Any problem in accessing this web page or navigating through? We would be happy to assist you with it. All right, so then we'll just start with another food product. So we've done a lot of plant-based food products. We can just look at an animal-based food product now. So we can just look at as simple as egg maybe. So we could just look at the egg, and this time I want to say boiled egg. So somebody's had boiled egg and, they want to look at it. Just 1 second. So if you look at this, you have under SNOMED. So this is another ontology, and you can also, keep these ontologies. You can also like have a filter for these ontologies and just say, I just want to keep this as my ontology. So here I can just click on chicken egg balls. It's very specific to the type of egg that they want to, they want to look at. So the definition is a chicken egg that has been boiled. It may be hard or soft boiled and may have its cell on or off. And when you look at the material entity, it says it's a food material. And when you look at the food material by organism, here it talks about an animal material. So it says that it has an animal origin and it's an animal food product, specifically a vertebrate, specifically an avian. Now under avian, they've now started mentioning avian egg food product, followed by a chicken egg food product. And then, it's a prepared chicken. So it's been processed. So if you look at this ontology, if you look at this, there are different types of food products. It could be just chicken egg, it could be preserved, it could be a product that is concentrated or dehydrated or frozen or unpasteurized, right? And under this prepared chicken product, we have baked, boiled, cooked, stewed, frozen, and cooked by microwaves. Very specific food processes are given. So under this, we're looking at a chicken egg, which is boiled. And again, this, you have different methods given you. So it's boiled, the shell is off and it's salted. Its shell is on and it is hard boiled. Shell is on and it's hard boiled. And again, it's the shell is on and it's soft boiled. So, very specific, representation of data, which can be used across ontologies to kind of give you a very unique identifier code. So this code is just for a chicken boiled egg. If you look at this, the chicken egg preserved, the ontology is just going to change. So here the food ontology identifier changes automatically. So there is a different identifier for each of these words or each of these products given in ontology. And then you can keep those ready and use them later when you want to cross-talk or cross-map across different ontologies. So, this is something very interesting when you look at OLS and you want to look at biscuits. Now, biscuit has a different definition. So it's mentioned a biscuit in the United States and part of Canada is a variety of small baked breads, goods with firm brown crust and a soft interior. And if you want to look, another definition in food on is very specific to Commonwealth nations and Ireland, where they're saying that it's usually called a cookie or a cracker in the US. And in the United Kingdom, it's basically hard and it may be savory or sweet, right? And then it shows that it also appears in FOBI. So you could also see how and where it is linked at FOBI. So it's not just looking at food on in isolation. I just wanted to point this out to you that you can look at the crosstalks between ontologies and, have fun with it by exploring it so that you can use it for your own, for your own research purpose. So like if you're looking at this, it comes under bakery food product and there are almost 423 categories under bakery food products if you look at it. And biscuit comes here. So it says biscuit hard food product and then, different varieties of biscuits. So you have cakes and leavening agents, etc. So just wanted to point that out.
Hello. Rintu?
Yes. Yes.
I have put something blue tea and I think no result it indicated. It gives the no result. So is it something differently spelled out or something like that?
So it might be that the ontology currently does not have that term.
Okay.
So there is the primary thing that is there. But nonetheless, first, as we mentioned earlier, is that sometimes the terminology which is we are trying to search might be present there as a synonyms. So
Okay.
so we have to see that how different ways that can be expressed. Maybe a simple Google search of that term can actually lead to some term which is very generic. For example, in your term, maybe suppose I have a, like for example, Assam tea, for example. or a Darjeeling tea, for example, there is a very specific to that region, and I might use the tea itself, the term, then I can get the hierarchical structure of in the food ontology. But the Assam tea or any region specific tea might be present there or might not be present there. If it is not present, then we tend to, requests sent to the developers, for example, on this case, the food ontology developer, and say, yes, this term is not included. Can we have a terminology or the term dedicatedly for this region specific tea itself?
Yeah, but it is not region specific.
So if it's not reasonable, they did not include it yet. So that is
Yeah,
that is-
yeah, maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, so in that case, we can actually submit the request and that can be done. Yeah.
I think then people like me have to do some more research, because I actually exactly look for the exact term. Maybe in other category I might get something.
Correct. We can assess that. So I think
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
one thing that we are actually looking forward to is that, through this one, do collectively things which is not there, and we can
Right.
this as a outcome of this workshop itself. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
And again, thanks for having us. Just want to touch upon, the question on, some people not being able to follow why there is a need for ontologies. Let me just try to make it, just think of it from an angle where, across the world, there are the same terminologies used in the medical field, right? Or there is the same scientific name given to different species of animals or plants. There's consistent across the board, so that when you're looking at, say, yellow yam, or you're looking at yam, there's a specific genus that comes up, right? So somebody mentioned that sweet potato has a different genus here. So, these things are consistent across the board, and it makes transaction of information very easy. So for instance, you have classification of medical conditions, and there's a specific guideline of this specific disease with this classification or cutoff is supposed to be called XYZ. In food is something very personal to all of us. We eat it every day. We're becoming more conscious about whether it's healthy or not, but we don't always pay attention to, where was it grown? What type of food product do I have? So in India, at least, we have a lot of indigenous plants that are grown. So which even if I'm living in North, I may not know what's grown in the South. Or I may not be even aware of the vegetables grown in the Northeast. So these things make transaction of information difficult. And sometimes those indigenous food products haven't come into the mainstream because nobody knows about them. Nobody's aware about them. And they might, or it could also be the other way around. I may call a particular food product by a certain name, which may be called something else in the rest of the world. So for instance, a small instance, like capsicums are called bell peppers. When I was a kid, I didn't know that. I thought bell pepper was something else, right? So all of these things make information, discussion at a broader level very difficult. And it doesn't make it very interoperable. That means I can't translate findings into agriculture, to nutrition, to health. So when I need to connect these three fields, I need to have the same terminologies. And ontologies are one step towards it. It's something that's probably dominated a lot by people from the computer science background, because it requires a lot of machine readability and more information on those fronts. But it's also something that we as people from nutrition or agriculture could contribute, because we're very, for us, food is something very natural that comes very natural to us. For them, it's more about, how do we connect it or look at the various connections. So that's how you can, it's more of an interdisciplinary approach when you look at these ontologies. And this is going one step forward on how, you can look at an angle of One Health in the long run, where you can, look at these different food products across the chain and see how, if they have the same unique identifier code, you can track them and see, is that a particular food product that could cause a specific disease or, could lead to an allergen reaction in a particular patient. So that's the reason why these ontologies came into being. I mean, and that's how food ontology developed. So, the basic reason was to track foodborne illnesses and to have a common terminology across the board. If you don't have the same name, then, there's a lot of misinformation and miscommunication that takes place. So I hope that answers your question and, clears some confusion about food ontologies. We would like to share a few reading materials with the ANH team, and if they could circulate that, that would help in reading, and we're happy to, get in touch and, discuss how we can take this forward with you guys. So thanks for having us.
Just to add upon what Kanika mentioned, so and also earlier there was a language multilingual component to it. So there are ontologies already exist, which is the extension of the food ontology. So there is the FCD, that is their wiki FCD is there, where they have made a platform in, I think 2019 they started this, what do you call as, the exercise. And there is an extension of the food ontology group itself, where a lot of different nationalities, you can actually incorporate the terms that is specifically used for this language. I think we will send all of those resources that we catered for this learning lab. I think we will share all of them to the LX and the team of NH itself. So happy to, if you feel free to just drop by email to Kanika or me or, any of the NHS team. We are happy to, provide you resources so that you can learn more about ontologies. I think couple of few of the people are not able to get the ontologies more detailed, but I think we're happy to provide those also directly. Yeah.
Thank you everybody again for joining us. We really appreciate taking the time out of your day to learn about food ontologies with our great facilitators. And there's plenty of more sessions in our online learning lab week. So thank you all again. I hope to see you at more sessions. Really glad you're participating in our conference this year. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.